All right, so we should be live at the moment. I'm just trying to get a few things going here, but I wanted to talk to you today live about my thoughts on iOS 14. So once we do get everything fully up and going, just making sure everybody can hear everything here as we get going on. But I wanted to talk to you about iOS 14. I know a lot of people are looking at iOS 14 right now and maybe thinking about getting the public beta, which is coming out today, I believe, is the first day that you can install the public beta of iOS 14. So I want to kind of dive into some of the settings. Let me dial down my aperture just a tiny bit, so ignore that real quick. But I thought that today we would dive into iOS 14 just a tad little bit. So I've had the developer beta of iOS 14 here on my iPhone 10 for a little over a week now. So I've kind of been using this as my main OS. And the whole purpose, by the way, for doing this video live is if you have any questions, I am monitoring the stream here on my iPad. And if you have any questions or you want to see a specific thing inside of iOS 14, drop a comment down below. I intend to leave this video up, however, so if you're not watching live and you have any questions, leave a comment down below and we'll jump into those. But if you are watching live and you have any questions, I am keeping an eye out on the stream over here, so if you have any questions, drop them in the comments over there. But we're going to go in depth and we're just going to kind of talk about iOS 14, tell you what I think about it, tell you what you need to know, and if you have anything you want to add to the discussion, or if you were tuning in with us here and you're checking out iOS 14 with us, then please do feel free to drop down some questions in the comments section down below. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, starting with the home screen. So the home screen, of course, in iOS 14 was probably the biggest difference between iOS 14 and all of the previous versions of iOS. So as you're seeing here, I do have a couple of the smaller widgets on my home screen. So I have the weather widget up here in the top corner of my device, and then I have a stocks widget down here in the bottom corner of my device. And scrolling through, those are actually at the moment the only widgets I have, though I do have a second instance of the stocks setting here on the very last page. I do have a little more information on the stocks, but I want to cover some of that with you here in this review as we're jumping right into things. And then I have another instance of the weather for some reason. So there are some interesting things to note about how these widgets work. So some of them, when you put them out on the home screen, for example, this one is following a specific ticker. It is following the plug power stock because I was watching that this week. And so I put that there on the home screen, and I put the plug power stock on my device so that I could watch it. Unfortunately, because it is a beta, the Robinhood application hasn't released a widget. And I don't intend to see a widget, or I guess not intend, but I don't expect to see third-party widgets until the official release of iOS 14. So it's going to be a couple of months before we see things like that happening. But what I will say is that with these widgets here, the ones that Apple has included, if you are looking at the one on the screen right now, so if we're looking here at the stocks widget, if I hold down on the stocks widget and hit edit widget, I can choose whatever symbol I want to follow. So if I want to follow the plug symbol, I can. If I want to follow Apple, I can. All I have to do is type in the stocks ticker symbol, and I can follow that particular symbol just as simply as typing in a few things, and I can follow it. So really convenient. I can follow it one stock at a time, and that works really, really well. So there's that instance of using this. And then comes the more confusing thing about this. If I swipe over a couple of pages, you'll see the one here that shows 3 of them. So if I go to show all 3 of them and I want to edit that widget, I can't do that. So for some reason, on this one, whatever the top 3 stocks you're following inside of the stocks app, that's all that it will display. And I think that's a terrible way for Apple to have designed this. I don't think they did the smartest thing possible when it comes to choosing how they want to do that. I think they definitely should have given you all of the options with that. It just seems a little odd. But what you can do to get around that is use the Smart Stack feature. So if you want to just follow whatever you want to watch, then you can just jump in with the Smart Stack option that Apple talked about briefly. So let me get focused in here again, and we'll talk about that. So if I just hold down anywhere on the home screen now, I don't have to be over an app, it'll go into what Apple has dubbed the jiggle mode, and I am then able to hit the plus icon up here, and I can scroll through with Smart Stacks. And I can go down and choose anything I want, any widget that I want, and I can pick something like stocks. So if I go down to stocks, I can choose from all of these different options of stocks, and I can swipe all the way over and get the little tiny one here, which is the one that I want to use in this instance. So if I want to do something like that, I can add the widget to my home screen, and you'll see it'll pop up right there. Now, what Apple intends you to do with this is you can actually drag a second app over it, and then you have two apps that you can go between, or you can remove a specific one from a Smart Stack. So Smart Stacks are meant to be multiple different widgets that you can swipe between, which is a really cool idea, and I really am a fan of Smart Stacks. But you can also edit the stack, and you can add in other things, or you can remove things you don't want, rearrange the order that they appear in, and they'll automatically rotate throughout the day to what they think you want to look at that given time. But if I go back and I add another widget, so I can add a second instance of a widget, I can scroll down to the stocks area, and I can pick up another one. So I can swipe all the way to the end, and I can just grab that widget just like that. And now I have two of them, and if I change the ticker symbol on one of them, then I am able to follow something different on that one, and I can then drop the two of them on top of each other, and just like that, I can thumb through them and see several different ticker symbols and see how those different stocks are doing. So that's just one thing, one minor little inconvenience that I noticed in there, and that's just something that, again, if you are doing stocks, you're going to notice that. And if you're not going to notice that. But it's one of the few things that you can't edit in all the sizes. You can edit just the one instance of the widget, but you can't do it with all of them. And that was something that I found was an actual problem with it, because I want to be able to see multiple things at once. But that was just weird that you couldn't do that. So I don't know. I think that's something that they're probably going to fix in the future. But at this particular moment, they have not addressed that problem. So that was just something that aggravated me while using the device, but I have found a workaround for it, and it works well enough for what I want to do. So I am okay with it in the state that it is in. So anyway, that is the widgets in that regard, and the different sizes do look pretty nice. So if I hold down and grab a different widget, I can choose all of these different widgets, and I can pick one that I want to add to the home screen. And again, it comes in 3 sizes, so we'll grab that one and just drag it out to the home screen and place it wherever we want. And now we have 2 widgets. So we have the bigger size there, and then one of these smaller squared ones, and we can kind of choose how we want apps to look around either of those 2 widget sets. So we can put 4 apps here, and we can put 8 of them down here below it, and we can arrange our home screens in a couple of different ways. So it still doesn't allow you to put apps just anywhere. For example, this widget here, if I wanted 2 apps here and 2 apps here and a widget in the center, I can't do that. And I think that's another annoying limitation of Apple. If I wanted to, for example, put this widget all the way over here in the corner, say right here, I can't. It goes back up to the top, and there's nothing you can do to get it somewhere else. The only way you can leave blank space is to do something like this and have it on the left, but you can never have a widget just hang out on the right. There's no way to do that, and that just seems like a ridiculous feature that Apple should totally change, but they have not done so, and it just seems very odd that you can't put widgets wherever you want them. It's a very Apple thing to do. They give you widgets, but you can only do what they want you to do with them. That's the most Apple sentence ever stated, but that is just how it works on the iPhone with widgets now. But the widgets come to both the iPhone and the iPod Touch, so I know a couple of people may have wondered about that. They do come to the iPod Touch. They do not come to the iPad, though. So if you have widgets that you want on your iPad home screen, it's not a thing. I don't know why they skipped that, but they are considering iPadOS to be its own completely different thing, and they just chose not to include widgets on the iPad. So I'm not really sure why they did that. It seems a little weird to me that they chose not to do widgets on the iPad, but it is what it is. It's a little odd, but I'm fine with it as long as they continue to increase what you can and can't do with it. But right now, it's just a little odd that you can't put widgets anywhere you want on the iPad. It just seems like another Apple move. They just seem to do that quite a bit, where you can't do what you want on the operating system and the device that you paid for. They're very, very determined to prevent you from just doing anything on your device, even though it's your device. And that's a very, very Apple thing to do. One thing that I did particularly find enjoyable about iOS 14, or that I found useful, I should say, is the correct term, is if you go inside of the camera app, they added a feature that was on the 11 Pro and nowhere else. And it's a feature that makes a lot of sense, especially if you are into videography. And I'm sure a lot of people watching on YouTube would consider themselves to be into it. You now have the ability to change your frame rate. So let me try to get this where it's good and in focus. You can see I have it at HD at 30 frames a second at 1080, which is about where I like to shoot most things. And I can just tap that right there, and it'll swap over to 60 frames per second. And then it will go back to 4K at 60. So I can go all the way up to 4K at 60, and then 4K at 24 frames per second, 4K at 30 frames per second, and then I believe it cycles back down to either 720 or it goes back down to 1080. I'm not really sure where we cycle to next. But anyway, great addition to the camera app. I was a big fan of that. Another thing that I found handy inside of the settings on iOS 14 in terms of camera adjustments that you can make, the front-facing camera, when you shoot a photo, in the past, it would mirror the image, so whatever you saw was the exact opposite of what was actually happening. So if you were looking at me in the camera app, it would flip it, and when you saved the photo, it would flip it back the other way. So you couldn't frame a shot the same way that it would come out looking. Like, you would frame the shot and then it would be the mirrored image. You can fix that now, which I'm a big fan of that. So I actually changed that so that it did mirror the settings that I have on the device itself. So now whatever settings I choose is just the settings that I get. So I'm very happy with that. I love that change. A little tiny change that I'm sure a lot of people are going to overlook and not really care about all that much, but it is a great addition to have in iOS 14. Another one, I made a full-on video about this, actually. If you go up to General and you scroll down to Accessibility, no, I guess Accessibility is on the main screen now. If you go into Accessibility, and if we head down to Touch and the back of the device, you'll see here back tap. You can program it to do things. It's kind of like the jailbreak tweak activator. So if I tap my phone like that, it will automatically launch the Google Voice Assistant. So I have a Google Home in the house, and if I talk to it, I can do what I want with the Google Home. It's over there, right there. So I have that, and I love it, and I wish that I could make it my default option on iOS, and I've wanted that for a long time because Siri is not as great as it could be. And I think iOS 14 has done a bit to improve Siri, but it's still nowhere close to the likes of the voice assistants that you can buy for your house, like the Google Home and the other one that I won't name because the name of it sets it off, and I have one on the desk right there, and I don't want to listen to it. But it's nice that you can now program things that you want. So you just tap the back of the device, and it opens up the Google Assistant, which is nice. And I can see all kinds of different things inside of there, which is pretty cool, actually, that you can do that. And you do a couple workarounds, but I have a video for all of that if you're interested in how to do that. Let's dive into a couple of other things here in iOS 14 that are big deals. So if we swipe all the way to the end and go over one more time, you will find the new app library, which I am a fan of to a degree. I don't know how often I will use it. I know a lot of people are very happy that they can remove a page like this, but I've always been a fan of having folders with all of my stuff organized the way I want it. And I think I would use the app library more if, for example, if you open up one of these things like productivity, it has financial things in there. Like it's got all my finance apps mixed in with things that I would classify as productivity. So it's like there's some of the things in here that I would absolutely call productivity apps. So if I'm looking at this page, I would call Pages, of course, and Keynote productivity apps. I would call PayPal and Robinhood and some of those things, I would call those finance apps. And I don't really want them in the same folder. I would not call the Contacts app on the phone a productivity app. I don't know why that's categorized as a productivity app. I think some of the categories that they choose are just awful, and there's nothing you can do to change what category an app is placed in. It just goes where it wants to go, and in typical, again, the theme with this, typical Apple fashion, they give you something that you want, but you can't do what you want with it. You can only do what they tell you that you can do with it, which is disappointing in a way because you can't do that, but you do get an alphabetical list, which I guess is kind of nice. What makes it nice, though, is if you don't want an app hanging out on your home screen. So, for example, here's an app that I've been meaning to delete anyway because it didn't work as I expected it would. So you have the option to remove the app, and now you can add it to just the app library if you want to get rid of it from your home screen, if it's just taking up room and getting in the way instead of tucking it into a folder, or you can delete it entirely, which is what I want to do with that one. But it works well enough. It's just there's a few things that I don't really see the purpose of. I know a lot of people are making the rounds on YouTube talking about how great this is, but it's just not the best thing ever. For example, Lifestyle has a whole conglomeration of things that don't really, in my opinion, belong together. Like my thermostat and the Chipotle app should not be in the same location. I just don't think that makes any sense to me. That's possibly a me situation that I just don't want those two apps together, but I don't think they belong together, and there's no way for me to tell Apple, hey, Chipotle and the thermostat aren't the same thing, and I don't want them to be the same thing, but there's nothing I can do to make them not the same thing. They're just not the same thing, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's, again, another theme that I'm finding throughout iOS 14. In typical day-to-day use cases, there's things that I want to fix, and I just don't have a solution for it, and it's disappointing that I can't solve some of the problems in iOS 14, because they just keep popping up in places that I don't understand why Apple doesn't allow me to just recategorize that. I can't move it. There's nothing I can do to fix it, and Apple particularly is bad about this. They just don't care. They're happy with the way it works, and they think that their AI solution is the be-all, end-all way to do things, and I disagree with them a lot of the time in the fact that their AR is as good as they claim it is, but, it's not bad. It does a pretty decent job of categorizing most things. It's just from time to time it could do a much better job. And in this particular instance, it is not doing the greatest of jobs with stuff like this. So I am a little disappointed with some of the things in iOS 14 that other people are just going on and on about. And maybe that's just me wanting iOS to be more Android-like, but I like iOS. And there's a lot that I like about iOS, which is why I still have an iPhone after all these years. But there's a lot that I like in Android, too, that I wish that they would borrow a little more than they are, just a little more freedom than they give you. One of the things coming in iOS 14 that is not there now is the ability to add and set a default search engine that is not Safari and a default mail app that is not Mail. So I can now do the Gmail app as my mail app, which is what I use, and I could set Chrome or something else as my default search engine, though I'm happy with Safari on the phone. I don't use Safari on my Mac, though. I use Google Chrome on there because why not? I mean, everybody does. So, but on the phone, Safari's pretty good, and I've lived with it as my default browser for ever more on the iPhone and the iPod Touch back in the day. I mean, I've been using iOS since 2008, and I love it. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I think I'm not going to utilize that too much, but I wish that I could set a default Maps application. Again, I've had issues with the Maps applications, and reasons that I continue to use Apple Maps is purely for the fact that Apple Maps works on the lock screen when you're driving. But Maps isn't one of the things you can set as a default. So I don't know why they didn't include that, but I would absolutely use either Google Maps or Waze as my default. I have both of those on my phone, but I don't use them that much because they just don't take very good a use of what the system is capable of doing with Apple Maps, but is not open with a developer API for them to use, maybe is the problem. I'm not really sure, but they definitely take a lot of situations and just wreck them with the fact that you can't use the app while you're driving and turn off the screen. There's a lot of little hidden things throughout iOS too that I am a fan of that people have kind of missed over talking. So, for example, the Apple Music app has been redesigned once again, which let me stop and digress real quick by telling you they redesign this app every single year, and I am good and sick of them redesigning this app. It's been since I think iOS 8.4 is when this came out. And I want to say it's been redesigned every single year since then. And I wish they would just choose a design that they like and stick with it because it has changed annually, and I'm getting a little aggravated with them for doing that because you'll learn the UI and the UX of an app, and then they change it, and you have to relearn some of the stuff, and it's just aggravating. But what I do like is now the album artwork takes up the background, and you don't have to be in lyrics mode to get this different look inside of the app. It's just there, and it looks ever so much better. So I'm very happy they did that. Other big system changes, I guess not big system changes, but other system changes that Apple made that they should have made a long time ago because they already wrote the software for the iPad. Picture-in-Picture made its way over. I don't really need to demo Picture-in-Picture. I'm sure everybody kind of understands what Picture-in-Picture mode is. If you don't, I mean, it's picture on the home screen of whatever the video is you're watching. But it's really, really a basic feature that I think has been on the iPad long enough. I'm not really sure what took it so long to get to the iPhone. Maybe they were just waiting for the screens to get big enough, but they've been big since 2014 with the iPhone 6. So I think it's more of it's about time that they scaled this down to the iPhone because it's been on the iPad for a long time. And they just now managed to bring it down to the iPhone. And I'm happy they did. But again, at the moment, it's something that you can only take advantage of on Apple's first-party apps because app developers haven't had access to the feature on the iPhone. So like Disney Plus and And some of those, Netflix, Hulu, whatever, they're not going to work with this. YouTube doesn't work with it. It doesn't work with it on the iPad either. YouTube is just bad at supporting features like that because I don't want you to listen to music in the background because that's a paid premium feature that they refuse to add for free YouTube. But you can jailbreak and get those features, and I don't understand why that is a thing. It's just aggravation at this point for me. Let's talk about something, though, that is a big deal, and that is the redesigned Siri interface. So Siri no longer takes up the entirety of the UI. It now just takes up this little bitty section down here in the bottom. And then when you search for something, it just pulls up a little banner up at the top. So if I say, what is Apple's current stock price? It'll do a little thing and then pop up there at the top. And I like the way that looks. It looks pretty nice. The only problem with it is you can't scroll back through and see the conversation you've had. And there have been times that I'll be doing something with Siri and I want to go backwards. And I have a couple devices here to show you the progression of Siri. So let me show you this iPhone 4S first. I want to just quickly talk about it. So on Siri in the past, when you've held down the home button and talked to Siri, this is iOS 7 right here that you're looking at. It took up the whole screen, and a lot of people found that to be annoying that it took up the whole screen. It never bothered me because I was talking to Siri and I just wanted to talk to Siri and find out the information that I wanted to know. And then you want to just get that information, and then I guess it's the thing is they added this feature, but you still can't interact with what's going on in the background. But I think what they should have done is gone more like what they did with the iPad back in iOS 6. So I've got an iPad right here, and I want to show you how Siri was laid out there back in iOS 6 because that was my favorite Siri layout ever. So I've got an iPad mini right here with iOS 6, and this was the best Siri interface that I think Apple has ever come out with. So it just pops up there on the side like that, and then when you ask it a question, what is Apple's current stock price? It's fantastic. It just pops up in the side like that. You get a little window, a little preview window. You can scroll back up. It doesn't obstruct the entire display, but you can still interact with the content that's happening. And I think that this is just the best design that Apple has come up with for Siri ever. I personally have always preferred the look and feel of iOS 6, but you have this little window of interaction right here. And then when you tap the background, it just goes away. And that is the same thing that happens now on the iPhone. So like if I pull up Siri on the iPhone and I'm talking to Siri, well, it's all fine and good, but as soon as I tap the background, just like in iOS 6, as soon as you tap the background, you lose everything, but you can't interact with the content on the screen either. So it's like the worst thing ever because, well, it does slim Siri down and it looks really nice. You know, it's aesthetically nice, but you also can't interact with anything else on the screen. So like as soon as I am doing something on the screen, if I tap anywhere else, the whole interface just disappears and I am Siri-less once again. So it's like, it's the same thing as before. It's just laid out in a much more flat way, I guess, is the only way to really describe it. I would say a very iOS 7 feel, but that's just the way it's been ever since iOS 7. A very flat, very minimal approach to it. They did the same thing with the call UI. So now when you get a phone call, it just pops up in the top and you can choose to dismiss it that way. This was another feature, a lot like the volume hub on the side. When you went to change the volume, it used to obstruct the whole screen. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you'd go to your volume settings, no matter where you were on the device, as soon as you hit them, it would fill up the entirety of the screen. That was a feature that really made people mad. And I don't understand why. That never bothered me. I've had iOS devices forever, and that's just never been a feature that has annoyed me. I always kind of liked it. Though I do like the new volume UI from a couple years back. But it's just nothing has ever bothered me when it pops up and fills the whole screen. I don't understand why that's always been such a big deal, because when you're doing something on the iPhone especially, when you're doing something on the iPhone, you can't get away and you can't do something else. Like, you can only do one thing at a time anyway. So when the Siri user interface pops up on the iPhone, that's all you can do. So yeah, it doesn't take up the whole screen, but it does, because you can't do anything else but talk to Siri. So it's like, why put Siri in a little window on the device when I can't do anything extra anyway? It doesn't make any sense that I can only do one thing at a time, but people are complaining about the fact that when you want to change volume, or when you want to talk to Siri, or when you get a phone call, that it obstructs the screen. The phone call one, I get a little more than Siri, but I thought that was a weird one, because you can't do two things at once anyhow. So I don't understand why that was such a big deal. That is kind of bringing us towards the end of my thoughts on iOS 14. I am still just getting acquainted with it. There's a few things that I found that don't work yet. So like, if we go into the control center, I'll show you one example. One thing I do like, though, is you now have access to your lights and things like that inside of the control center. So if I want to quickly change the way the lights in my room look, I can do that. But I can also scroll down. And a new feature that's coming is the ability to scan an NFC tag and download an applet. Of course, the developers haven't had the chance to release that yet, so I can't demo that. And there's a new bedtime mode, which I'm excited about. I actually built a Siri shortcut on my phone over a year ago, and that Siri shortcut pretty much shuts my phone down at night until 7 o'clock in the morning. So from 11 o'clock to 7 o'clock, this phone can only be reached by certain people, and anybody else just gets blocked. And I get the call at 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's it. So aside of my mother, nobody can contact me from 11 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning, because the whole phone pretty much just shuts down. And I programmed it to do that because it's like, I don't want my phone bombarding me with notifications all night long. So at 11 o'clock at night, whatever's going on, my phone just pretty much shuts down. Like, it doesn't power off, and I can still access the little flashlight toggle and whatever. But that's about all I use it for. So that's my thoughts on iOS 14. So hopefully you found some of that interesting. This was a little long, but that was a live video on iOS 14. Hopefully you found that interesting. If you did, go ahead, hit the like button, and check out some of my other videos. Maybe subscribe if you're new around here, and I will catch you soon.